In the 1980s, people wanted a vehicle that could haul cargo, commute to work every day, stay compact enough to maneuver around the city, and not guzzle gas like full-size pickup trucks. The small truck craze began to take shape, but in this craze, one name arrived a bit late. In 1986, when the market already had familiar faces and the game was heating up, Jeep finally delivered its own answer. And ironically, just a few years later, it exited the stage, leaving behind a strangely quiet pause. That vehicle was the Jeep Comanche, a small pickup with the soul of Jeep. Music. Born right as demand was rising, yet forced to live under the harsh strategic decisions of the American auto industry. Today, we're going to reopen that short-lived reel of film, tracing each milestone to understand why the Comanche appeared, why it was loved, and why it disappeared so quickly. To understand why the Comanche appeared, we have to go back to the 1970s, when small trucks began winning over Americans in a quiet but lasting way. Vehicles from Japan were compact, fuel-efficient, durable, and did exactly what a truck needed to do without demanding too much. While full-size pickups still dominated the highways, in neighborhoods, small job sites, and mid-size farms, the small truck became a practical tool, perfectly suited to the times. The Big Three in Detroit couldn't ignore it. At first, they took a detour, importing trucks, and then slapping their own badges on them to sell as in-house products. That's how names like Chevrolet Love, Ford Courier, and Dodge Ram 50 came to be. American on the outside, but rooted in foreign partner vehicles. This approach got them into the market quickly, but it also exposed a problem. Imported light trucks were hit with added costs from a special tax commonly called the chicken tax, making it no longer as cheap as before to bring fully built trucks into the America. Moving into the early 1980s, Detroit began building its own small trucks, not only to avoid the tax, but also to keep control. The Ford Ranger and Chevrolet S10 became the two spearheads. Dodge also prepared its answer with the Dakota's debut in 1987, targeting the middle ground. A bit larger than traditional small trucks, yet still more compact than full-size pickups. By then, the market had taken a clear shape. The rules of the game were set, and anyone arriving late would face extremely intense competitive pressure. In that picture, American Motors Corporation, often shortened to AMC, was like the fourth automaker standing on the edge of the race in the early days. They had Jeep. They had off-road credibility, but their resources couldn't compare to the Big Three. In fact, Jeep once had the J10 Gladiator, a pickup line based on the wagon. But that story didn't go as far as people had hoped, and its chapter closed as early as 1972. In this period, there was a project called Cowboy based on the Hornet platform, but it was ultimately cancelled due to limits in manufacturing capacity and resource priorities. In other words, they saw the opportunity, but they didn't yet have the strength to seize it. And the price of being a step behind in the American auto industry can sometimes be an entire decade left behind. In 1981, Jeep launched the CJ8 Scrambler as a way to test market reaction, stretching the CJ7's wheelbase, adding a rear bed, and creating a vehicle that could both play and work. But the reality was harsh. Sales weren't strong, with only about 300 units in the first year. Even so, the Scrambler is remembered more for its association with Ronald Reagan as an everyday symbol of the American spirit of that era. Simple, tough, and carrying a bit of road dust. Moving into 1984, Jeep introduced a character that changed the company's entire game, the new generation Cherokee. With a boxy, compact, modern shape, and notably much lighter than the old body-on-frame off-roaders. This wasn't just a new model, but a new platform, a new skeleton for Jeep to step into the future. And seeing the potential success of that platform, AMC immediately understood one thing. If they wanted a true small truck, they had to birth it from this very Cherokee. But in that very moment, the engineering problem showed up like a crack on the blueprint. The Cherokee used a unibody construction, meaning the body and frame were nearly fused into one, lightweight and rigid in the way a passenger vehicle is. Music. A truck is different. It has to carry loads, resist twisting, and absorb the jolts of a bed filled with tools, lumber, or building materials. Using a unibody platform to build a truck sounded like a risky decision, and the biggest risk was in the rear bed area where all the weight would concentrate. The engineer's solution at the time was like a very skillful film splice. The front section, the cab, kept the Cherokee's unibody spirit. So, the vehicle stayed light, solid, and rode smoothly like a family vehicle. But the rear was designed as a separate assembly, a removable truck box mounted to a true load-bearing frame structure. They used a fully boxed frame design with two longitudinal frame rails about 8 in tall, creating the feel of a real truck frame in the rear, while the front still carried the Cherokee's modern spine. What's interesting is that this thinking didn't come out of nowhere. It was like a piece of an idea rescued from earlier prototypes, from an AMC truck project that had once been abandoned, now used at the right time in the right place. And then there's the suspension, where the Comanche most clearly revealed its refusal to follow the beaten path. Up front, instead of older solutions, they used a 4-link setup with coil springs, an advanced approach for its time, helping the front wheels hold the road better, and giving a confident driving feel on rough surfaces. In the rear, the Comanche stayed loyal to what a truck needs: a solid axle and leaf springs. But its leaf springs weren't the simple, short, stiff type. They were made unusually long so they could both carry loads well and keep the ride from being too harsh when driving unloaded. That's why the Comanche's payload ratings back then made a lot of people take a second look. The standard version could already carry about 200 lb. And if you chose the heavy-duty package, often referred to as metric ton, that number could climb to about 200 lb. For a small pickup built on a unibody-based platform, it was a small truck that was both compact and strong with distinctive engineering and real ambition. In the base configuration, the Comanche used AMC's 5L 4-cylinder engine with fuel injection. Practical and straightforward. It's the kind of engine that doesn't try to impress with numbers, but makes up for it with an everyday work spirit. Easy to maintain, easy to live with. Exactly what a small pickup is bought for: to run reliably, not to show off. Jeep also offered GM's 8L V6 with a carburetor. It sounds appealing because it has more cylinders, but in reality, it created a contradiction. It was often judged to be weaker than expected and more fuel-hungry than the 4-cylinder version. And then there was a very rare, very odd branch in true 1980s fashion: Renault's 21L Turbo Diesel. That was a period when American automakers were still experimenting with different paths to achieve better fuel economy, and the Comanche became a small stage for that experiment. Comanche diesels today therefore carry a unique appeal, not because they were common, but because they're a trace of an era when the industry was still feeling its way forward. Along with the engines came the transmissions, and Jeep stayed true to the let the customer choose spirit. The standard setup was usually a 4-speed manual. Simple, easy to fix. The proper kind of work truck gearbox. Anyone who wanted more comfort or better optimization could choose a 5-speed manual or Chrysler's 3-speed automatic, making the Comanche easier to drive in the city and less tiring in traffic, especially for people using it as a daily driver, and not just for hauling. The drivetrain options also expanded in true Jeep fashion. Buyers could choose 2W2W2W wheel-L drive for savings and simplicity, or opt for four-wheel drive to turn the Comanche into a truck that could haul gear and still be ready for dirt roads, snowy roads, and slick climbs where ordinary small trucks start to hesitate. What also made the Comanche stand out was its starting price, about $7,049 at the time. And if adjusted to the price level many years later, it would be around a little over $20. It was once one of the cheapest Jeep models, like a ticket into the Jeep world for practical buyers. And then 1987 arrived, music, like a major scene change in the whole film. Jeep dropped GM's 2.8L V6 and replaced it with what many consider the brand's legend, AMC's 4.0L inline 6, with about 173 horsepower and 220 feet of torque. Not only was it more powerful, this engine also had a very mechanical feel, a deep note, a full, steady pull, and a durability that made people believe the truck could run through years without having to beg luck for mercy. Accompanying this period was the appearance of a 5-speed manual transmission from Peugeot, but it only lasted for a few years. In March 1987, the Comanche story moved into a different chapter. Chrysler acquired AMC for about $1.5 billion, and from that moment on, Jeep was placed into a new ecosystem where every decision was based on the logic of product planning, parts costs, and making sure the model lines didn't step on each other. Chrysler's strategy at that time was to standardize components, reduce complexity, improve reliability, and serviceability. The very practical mindset of a corporation pulling pieces together into a smoothly operating machine. By 1991, the Comanche was updated with Chrysler's standard electronics, and most importantly, the 400L engine entered a stronger phase. The high-output 40L version was boosted to about 190 horsepower, making the truck feel quicker with thicker pulling power and a sharper throttle response. Along with the technical upgrades, the Comanche was also shaped through trim levels to serve different kinds of customers. There were trims that leaned toward minimalism and getting the job done, and there were also trims aimed at a more equipped feel with more touches and more character. So buyers wouldn't see it only as a pickup, but as a truck with its own style. Trim names like Custom, X, XLS, Chief, Laredo, Pioneer, and Eliminator formed a range of choices from practical to personality-driven. Among them, there were special packages that collectors today often bring up simply because they marked the era, like commemorative editions tied to major moments in American life. In 1988, there was an Olympic music-themed version, a kind of the moment edition, in true American car fashion, where the manufacturer used a few identifying details to stamp a historical moment onto the body, turning a small pickup into a drivable souvenir on the road. Moving into 1992, the door closed. The Comanche was discontinued after a short life, leaving behind total sales of approximately 190,000 units. Enough to be remembered, but not enough to become a generational nameplate under Jeep. At that point, the question emerged. A vehicle that did its job well, yet disappeared too fast, as if it never even had time to grow old. The first reason lay in the market's rhythm. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the small truck arena began to change color. Customers gradually leaned toward vehicles that were larger, more comfortable, and more versatile. Many brands and many small truck lines that relied on partner platforms also began to withdraw one by one or change direction. But the most important reason was in the boardroom. After Chrysler took over AMC, everything was arranged under a very clear product planning hierarchy. Dodge handled the trucks while Jeep focused on sport utility vehicles. On paper, that was how the corporation avoided stepping on its own toes, optimized costs, and positioned its brands. But for the Comanche, It felt like a sentence already written. Because even though the Comanche was a small pickup, it sat exactly where the corporation didn't want overlap. It competed directly with the Dodge Dakota, a name that was being prioritized to represent trucks within the house. The two vehicles targeted similar buyers, went into similar dealerships, and if both were strongly supported, it would create unnecessary internal competition. As a result, the easiest strategic choice was to eliminate the model that didn't fit the Jeep brand's role. That story didn't happen only to the Comanche. Even Jeep's larger pickup lines like the J10 were once put in a tough spot because they encroached on the territory of Dodge's full-size trucks. Once the boundaries were drawn, anything that stepped across them risked being pulled back, and the Comanche was the first name to be pulled back the earliest. The irony of history is this. Years later, Jeep and Dodge still had moments of sharing platforms and sharing product thinking within the same corporation. A reminder that the auto industry always changes in cycles by demand, by need, by profit priorities. And then by 2011, Dodge stopped selling trucks the old way when the truck side split off into the separate Ram brand, as if history turned back to look at itself and let out a small laugh. After the Comanche left the assembly line, the brand continued to grow through sport utility vehicles, through the image of four-wheel drive pushing through snow, mud, and climbs, and through that feeling of freedom that only Jeep could sell. By 2019, Jeep officially returned to building trucks with the Jeep Gladiator, a model based on the Wrangler platform and aimed straight at the DNA Jeep had built over decades. It was like a confirmation that Jeep had never truly lost its connection to trucks. It had simply been forced to set it aside. What's worth noting is that when it came time to name that comeback, the winning name was Gladiator, not Scrambler or Comanche. If Scrambler evokes memories of a bold era of experimentation, if Comanche is the short-lived reel of the 1980s, then Gladiator carries a clearer symbolic link to Jeep's earlier pickup truck heritage. It's a name that already smells like steel, carries the spirit of conquest, and stands easily beside the Wrangler like a pair from the same bloodline. If you also see the Comanche as more than just a small pickup truck, if you see it as a forgotten piece of American history, then subscribe to the channel right now. Hit follow and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next episode. See you next time.